What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Keith and Mike Watch Deep Space Nine. So much is happening. I'm very excited to talk about this episode. If you notice little differences in today's video, it is because Mike is on the road. Mike is out doing he's starring in a production of a musical, and you can pay money to see him perform in musical theater in a week or so. But that means he's traveling, and so we're doing this a little bit differently. So we're probably going to script a bunch of stuff. Bear with us. It'll be better once he's back from his show. How's it going, Mike?
It's going well, Keith. We're talking about Duet today, although I should probably put all of those in post so that you could be underneath them, correct?
Sure, whatever. It depends on how much work you want to do.
That's a good point. No, it's going well. It's I'm in the middle of the Adirondacks, so it's a very difficult internet experience, but we're going to do our best to not screw up too bad so that you can be a part and see how great we look and talk about this great episode. That's most important, Keith, at the end of the day. This is a great episode of Star Trek.
See, this is where we are called upon our greater goodness to get over the fact that we're not lit well, because we have a fantastic episode to talk about this week. I'm so excited. We're doing season 1, episode 18, Duet. But before we do that, before we beg for your money and talk about the patrons, I think we should acknowledge that this is the first episode that we're back since we lost Nichelle Nichols, another one of our legendary original series cast, an icon in sci-fi, in civil rights, in a lot of different ways, and by all accounts, just a fine person. And so we certainly wish her well as she continues into whatever's next. And you will be missed. And yeah, so just anyway, Nichelle Nichols, best wishes to your family and everybody else. So I don't have a good transition from that, but I will transition to I think it's time that we talk about our patrons on patreon.com/KandM, where they're getting all sorts of bonus materials, some of which we owe them, but nonetheless, there's a lot of really fun stuff up there. We have bonus episodes. We have Watch Mike sleepily watch Deep Space Nine. I can't wait to watch you watching Duet last night after 12 hours of tech. After a 10 out of 12, I'm assuming.
Yeah, we've started that. It was great.
Yeah. So so Mike, to cheer you up, why don't you shout our patrons?
Yes, we've got Brian Kaufman, thank you. Casey Clark, Cloud Lover 69, Jorge Novoa, and the mysterious Alan Zimmerman, CRM Productions, Charles Babbage, and welcome to the family. He just beamed aboard. Kyle Sweeney, we're happy to have you. Happy to finally get your name on the episode. And you, too, can join us here at patreon.com/K&M. Get your name on this graphic that Keith loves to update. Man, this one's fun to update because
no, seriously.
It means it's happening.
Sometimes it's annoying. This is never annoying to update. But you know what it is annoying? It's us begging you, if you haven't subscribed, do us a favor, give us a like, give us a subscribe, hit the notifications bell, because it really does help us grow our little show here. And look, I just want to say I appreciate you watching this. I appreciate you joining us on this journey. I know that there are a lot of other shows similar to ours, and I listen to them too. I love them. So, but nonetheless, I very much appreciate you joining us for this. So, Mike, what do you say we start talking about the world around Duet?
Yes, Keith, I think we shall.
All right. Well, Duet aired on Sunday, June 13th, 1993. The top song, you ready, Mike? Continued to be That's the Way Love Goes, Janet Jackson's masterpiece. Let's hear it, Mike.
That's the way love goes. Something like that?
I have no idea. The top movie. Now, this one I'm excited about. Because sometimes, the 30-year-old top movie, like, oh, I don't remember that, or like, oh, yeah, that wasn't very good. That was very 90s. Do you know what the top movie was this week, Mike?
No, Keith, I can't wait for you to tell me, in fact.
It's Jurassic freaking Park! Debuted this weekend. Yes, I mean, John Williams, thank you. Steven Spielberg, thank you. What a groundbreaking film that was in so many ways. Saw it in the theaters. It blew my mind, just like everybody else who saw that for the first time. Still holds up remarkably well. You know, it's Jurassic Park. I don't need to say anything more about that. And no amount of nonsense.
The sequels are shit. That one works.
Well, I mean, the sequels are what you expect a dinosaur movie to be. You know, it's fun, it's action, it's chomp chomp, run, 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 run.
Yeah, that's true.
The first one is so amazing because it exceeds that. It's a movie. Like, it's a real life movie that just happens to have dinosaurs running around chomping people, and it has something to say, and so, you know, the rest of them, I don't hold it against them. I love dinosaurs eating people. Run, run, boom, boom. That's great. It's just that the original was like so much elevated. So anyway, the New York Times headline says the UN says attack dealt heavy blow to Somali faction. There's stuff going on in Somalia at that point, not just Bosnia. It was a oh wait, no, Bosnia is in our other podcast. Well, nonetheless, we in 2000. No, what am I thinking of? Oh no, I guess it is now. I don't know. I give up. This episode. Let's talk about this episode because we're a mess. Yeah. The world is a mess. But this episode is not. Duet was directed by James L. Conway, who directed 7 episodes of Deep Space Nine, 3 episodes of Next Generation, and 4 episodes of Voyager. First time on Deep Space Nine. The show has a teleplay by Peter Allen Fields, who last wrote Progress. Interestingly, another Kira-based episode. It has a story by Lisa Rich and Janine Kerrigan-Fauci, who both worked on, wait for it, Move Along Home. Crazy, right? And then Duet.
Okay. All right.
Hey, whatever. So, I think it's time, Mike, we do something a little trivial. What do you say?
Now, Keith, waste your time with trivial trivia.
Just 3 of them here. The plot of Duet is similar to Robert Shaw's 1967 play, The Man in the Glass Booth. A production, one of the productions of which starred Leonard Nimoy. And it's a play about the Nuremberg trials. And so it has a very similar sort of a structure to this. Great source material. I'd love to have seen Leonard Nimoy do that part. So cool. All right, so the next piece is we solidify in this episode that the Cardassian occupation of Bajor is a metaphor for the Nazis' occupation and war in World War II. And I think that is a really important piece of information that we've been hinting at thus far in the show, and this really does solidify it. And I think that we'll talk about it. The last piece of trivia about this episode specifically is it's, once again, another bottle episode. And Peter Allen Fields, the writer, said that producers came to him and said, "Hey, Pete, can you do us a favor? Can you write an episode that costs nothing?" And did. And, you know, sometimes when you have limitations, when you have restrictions, it really, you know, cramps your style and limits what you can do and makes for an inferior episode. And sometimes it opens the door for something like this. And it's really, really cool. So the guest stars this week include the return of Mark Alaimo as Gul Dukat. We have Robin Christopher as Neela. We have Norman Large as the Koberian captain, who also, Norman also played 2 characters on Next Generation, 3 on Deep Space Nine, and 2 on Voyager. And, of course, Harris Yulin as Maritza, a legendary actor who has done a ton of work on television and film. He has an Emmy nomination for, would you imagine? Frasier is what he has his Emmy nomination for.
Who was he on Frasier?
I don't know. I'd have to look it up.
Huh.
But
you learn something every day.
Folks, you learn something every new here on Keith and Mike Watch Deep Space Nine.
Keith and Mike loses his mind while Keith watches and laughs.
Well, it's kind of exactly what's happening. But look, Mike is starring in a show that's going up in 10 days of rehearsal?
Less than that. Much less than that. We have our first preview Thursday.
Oh my god. Yeah, and he just did tech. Now, if you're not in the theater, the tech days usually end in what we nicely call a 10 out of 12, which means you are working 10 hours out of 12 straight hours.
Yeah.
And
we have another one tomorrow.
You have another one. Well, that's fun. He played Jerome Belasco in an episode of Frasier called A Word to the Wise Guy.
Okay.
So, there you go. So, Mike, what do you say? Rest your voice because you've got a show, and let other Mike sing us into our screening room.
Poor me.
Okay, so the teaser of Duet begins with Kira and Dax chatting about their ill-spent youths when a freighter hails asking to dock. The captain says he is a sick passenger with a condition called Kalanora. Kira is immediately lost in thought. And she decides she wants to meet this person because this condition was only found in the survivors of a mining accident on Galatep, a forced labor camp during the occupation that she helped liberate, and that the survivors were a symbol of strength and courage to the Bajoran. And Cisco gets it immediately and tells her to take as much time as she wants. So, first off, cool alien design on the
very cool
on the captain of the freighter there, and already I can sense in this episode that this is like a serious thing, and I really like that Cisco immediately gets it. And I think that's just good leadership. He's like, I can read between the lines. Sometimes the characters don't read the subtext, but in this case, he definitely did. And I think there's a, and in Cisco getting it, I think there's two levels of storytelling happening there. One is about Cisco, that he is a good leader. He understands the importance of these things. But I think it's also what we're going to do throughout this entire episode is reinforce how devastating and serious this occupation was. And that he treats it with the reverence we do World War II. And I think that it, even though we don't know anywhere near the extent of this, we see in his reaction like, oh, okay, yep. And I think that's good storytelling. So when Kira arrives at the infirmary, she is shocked and appalled to see that the survivor is actually a Cardassian, not a Bajoran. She calls security immediately. So what were you feeling here, Mike?
Well, I mean, it was clear that she recognized him, or she thought that she did. At least that's what I thought from the top. And I like that she calls security in, and there's this bit of tete-a-tete. At first, I thought this was going to be one of those plot lines that we've kind of already explored, where he knows her, she knows him, and we're going to take the episode to discover where they bumped into each other before. I'm glad that it goes a different way because we've kind of done that episode earlier on in the season. In fact, very early in the season. So this was good, but I'm kind of off kilter, and I know that actually from this little tete-a-tete here, you knew that we were going to get some serious acting chops this episode.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and there's a couple of interesting layers retroactively when you look at this initial thing. One, he tries to run and is caught almost immediately, which is interesting when you look back retroactively at his plan. Once you understand,
it's funny. I think I joke in the watch along that I was like, oh, he's pretty slow. He's got a hitch in his get along, which actually tracks on many levels because it seems like he wants to get caught, but also he's sick.
Right. So there's many different layers there, and we don't know it yet. But your assumption that she knows him is wrong. It's merely that he's a Cardassian, which is interesting. He, in this interaction, accuses Kira of hating him because he's a Cardassian, and Kira calls him a war criminal. So Sisko and Kira meet with Odo in his office.
Though, potential wormhole, like, when it turns out he is who he is, if he had really had his face reconstructed, she should have recognized him.
Well, I don't think she knew what the... Oh my god, I can't believe I forgot his name. Agul Darheel looked like.
So yeah, I guess he's not like the Hitler symbiote. He's more
No. He's basically
the leader of that camp.
It's a stand-in for one of the concentration camps. So it's like a leader. So like if you were like a history nerd, you like everybody knows what Hitler looks like. If you're a history nerd, you might know who like Goebbels looks like, but most people wouldn't be able to like, oh, that's Goebbels or whatever. And I think it's sort of that level of thing where she's certainly like, you know the name, right? And so I think that's the level that she's at. So she didn't know what he looked like. So Kira, oh god, I'm in Act 2 now. I scrolled down. So Sisko and Kira meet in Odo with his office. The Cardassian's name is Maritza, and he's not listed on any of the war criminal lists. And Odo's very clear to point out, I have them all, which is interesting. Kira doesn't care. She explains that the only way he could have contracted Kalanora, which is the disease that he has, is by being at Galatep when the accident happened. And they liberated it 12 years ago, and she was a part of that, and discovered absolutely brutal atrocities. So here's where it's all the more clear that this is a stand-in for a concentration camp. And I think those of us who, grew up in the 20th century, and obviously we were not a part of it, but we grew up with that sense of reverence, with that sense of like stakes to that. And, and one of my dear family friends was one of the people who did liberate a concentration camp. And that comes with it a specific type of trauma that I think that we see in Kira. That obviously it's not the trauma of being there, but even the act of witnessing it, of rescuing when you're there to fix it, like that's stuff you're going to carry with you for the rest of your life.
Yeah, and I think what's great in this bit too is that yes, I think they rely heavily on the analogy they're making and our emotional baggage and stakes and heft that we align with that. So they do some quick. They emotionally take some shortcuts by using that analogy. However, I think Nana Visitor here really still in this little monologue she gives where she kind of breaks down, and it's really only a couple of lines of dialogue.
Yeah.
She really reinforces those stakes and gives the emotional weight there too. So I think it's really profound how quickly she's able to get up to speed emotionally very quickly in this scene.
Well, and I think that's where we start to see the abilities of the actress. And by the way, and we've been saying it wrong this whole time, it's Nana, not Nana.
Nana Visitor. Okay.
Nana Visitor.
My bad.
No, I was getting it wrong too. And I've been a fan for 30 years. But yeah, I mean, you can see that she clearly knows as the actress what this means to the character. And so the character, and Kira, it's not going to take very long to get to that emotional place when you're talking about this sort of stuff. It's really good performance. So Sisko decides to talk to Maritza alone in his holding cell. He asks him how he contracted Kalanora. And Maritza says it's a different but similar condition and he denies working at the camp or ever having been on Bajor. And I think at this point we've established that Maritza was a file clerk. Apparently at the camp. So we have another lie here that he does, which again, retroactively, his like deception that he's trying to pull off here is very sophisticated.
Plotted, yeah.
And it's like he's not just pretending to be this guy. He's pretending to pretend not to be this guy, and has like he's built these intentional walls that they have to break through to add credibility to his story, which is brilliant. I mean, this guy, I mean, Maritza, this guy is clearly brilliant in how he has orchestrated this whole thing. Anyway, so on the other side of the brig, in the drunk tank, a Bajoran complains about being in the same cell as a Cardassian. And I think, you know, I think the performance here of the drunk throughout the whole episode could have been a little bit more nuanced than it was.
Yeah, but the whole character is very much a character of convenience and to serve various plot contrivances. So, I mean, it's hard to punch that far up.
No, and I get that. I just like the characters played for comedy a little bit. And like I think that's probably not the way to go with it. Like I get that you want him to seem harmless at this stage. He's like, oh, he's a harmless old drunk. He doesn't know anything. But I think that there's
he's actually superfluous too, right? Because I think that the point that I think they're trying to make at the end of the episode, which I won't pre-spoil, could have been better made because they take the time to set the chess pieces of there's those survivors of the camp on the station because they want to see justice or whatever. They could have easily used them as the mechanism to what happens.
They could have, although I think again we're talking about the themes at the end of the episode, but it's kind of that the story is sort of what the story. It's an idea. I think their point was the average person's hatred being created by this, not the actual victims. And I actually kind of like that it's not one of the victims who does this, that it's just a Bajoran. And go ahead.
Yeah, that makes sense because I guess that yes, there's a distinction there, right? Because they would be vindicated to want they would be justified, I feel, in wanting retribution for anybody who was there.
Any Cardassian at all. Right.
The complicity of inaction.
Right.
Which I think is what he's dealing with himself anyway. Which is what is so complex about it, and I love. Versus, like you said, the story that's been told, the sort of just overarching sentiment from the average.
Right.
Bajoran.
And it becomes racism in reaction to atrocity.
Right.
Not specific. I'm not angry at specific Cardassians. I'm just angry at Cardassians, period. And which is the logical consequence of an occupation like this. But that is in itself another level of tragedy, another level of darkness that has happened there. Anyway, so we go back to Sisko's office, and Bashir confirms that Maritza does indeed have Kalanora, and that he was lying when he said he had something similar. And that proves that he was actually at the labor camp. So we've caught him in a lie here, the first one. So Sisko then has a Zoom with a Bajoran minister who thanks him for capturing a Cardassian war criminal. He also says that Kira has taken responsibility for the situation. When Sisko pushes back on having the jurisdiction, the minister says, "We will have him." And appropriate if nothing, that's good visual effects on that Zoom call.
Yeah, totally.
Because that was not done in camera. That was done in post. But to have the layer, because you have the background that you're on, which probably is a blue screen or green screen. Then you have the video overlaid on that, and then you're overlaying the reflection to show the depth on that. That's good stuff.
Yeah.
That's good stuff, guys. Anyway, so we begin Act 2 on the promenade. Sisko sits down with Kira and tells her he wants Odo to take over the investigation. Now, I don't know what that table is in the middle of the hallway. That she's, I guess it's like a restaurant. The architecture of the restaurants that aren't Quarks on are a little bit weird on Deep Space Nine, because they just sort of like spill out into the. It's like you're in an airport, because that's essentially what Deep Space Nine is. This is an airport, but they've got like sidewalk seating in an airport. I think that's what's happening there.
You can also tell every time they move, the little flowers on the desk are like.
Yeah, they should have locked those flowers down.
Yeah.
Anyway, so he wants Odo to take over the investigation. He reminds Kira that until there's proof, Maritza is just a traveler under suspicion. Kira denies being on a vendetta and promises to be impartial. She asks Sisko as a friend, because the Bajoran needs to be the person to investigate for the honor of all those who died. And Sisko
and Mike
agrees.
takes the 2 worst screenshots of all time. 1, 2.
This terribly serious, beautiful scene. That is how it is immortalized. Well, anyway, Sisko agreeing, I think, is, once again, Sisko does really good Siskoing in this episode. Makes good, fair, rational decisions. And her point that it should be a Bajoran who does this investigation is a good one. I get it. And him pushing back, like, okay, but you have to be impartial. All of that's good. That's all good Star Trek world. Kira goes to the brig as Odo lets the drunk out. The drunk reinforces that he wants the Cardassian hanged. Odo's been investigating, and so far, Maritza's story checks out. Kira then goes to talk to the prisoner. Maritza complains he doesn't have any yamak sauce. Call back. Gotta love that word.
I said I know a guy. We know a guy.
We do. Dude, you need 5,000 ravages? We got it. He says that he accuses Kira's passion of being persecuting Cardassians. And here's where we see the next level of defenses break down. He admits being at Galatep, but tells Kira you'll be disappointed, and that he was merely a file clerk. He mentions here his boss, Guldar Heel. This is the big bad here. But he mentions that Guldar Heel liked his filing system, and he jokes about awaiting execution. Kira does not find it funny, but still thinks he's lying. God, it's the nuances of the performance here is so, because at this point he's telling the truth but lying. Right, he's trying to lie by telling the truth. He's charming and yet malevolent at the same time. If you think about it from the standpoint of an actor, that's a hard lift to seem like you're lying when you're telling the truth, and to have have so many different layers of intention behind your performance,
and laying the groundwork for your heel turn,
right,
where you can be the big bad.
That's right.
So as to obfuscate the truth you just told.
Right. I love it. It's so interesting.
Whilst, well, when we get there, role playing the big bad so well, right? Using what he observed,
right,
and having to put on that sort of egotism and evil,
grandiosity. Grandiose
is really
evil. Yeah. And while showing all of the emotions behind all of that, because he's writing the real Maritza's guilt and shame and anger and sadness underneath the rage and pomposity and the whatever of the character he's playing. And we forget there's an actor underneath that. So we have an actor.
Yeah.
So at this point in this scene, we have actor, we have Maritza, we have Darhiel, we have Maritza. it's
It's a ton.
it's a ton, and
It's a ton.
yeah, we'll talk more about Harris Yulin, but oh my goodness, what a performance! Anyway, oh, go ahead.
No, that's all.
Okay, very good. So she asks him if he witnessed the atrocities. He says he vaguely heard a scream from time to time, but denies the atrocities altogether. He says if people died there, it was because of accidents and fights. And there is a, so this is talking about layers, right? So this is him playing the part of Maritza, who is cold and uncaring and in denial, not the Maritza, the true one, who is feeling all of this. But it's brutal. His callousness and his denial there is very shocking if you're watching it, and you see that in Nana's performance. He continues. He said that Gul Darhiel started the rumors about the brutality in order to scare Bajorans, to keep them feeling helpless and like victims. He asks to be let go, but Kira says no, and he accuses her again of only wanting vengeance. And that takes us into Act 3, where we get a zoom from Gul Dukat, who we haven't... Look at that screenshot. Oh, terrifying. We get a zoom from Gul Dukat with Sisko asking why they're holding on to Maritza. Sisko asks for information about his real identity, and Dukat says they're just holding on to him because he's Cardassian. Dukat says that the Bajorans are hate mongers, obsessed with the idea of the atrocities at Galatep. I mean, so we see a little bit of Dukat here. Now we've seen him in the pilot and then maybe one other episode. Is that true? Do you remember?
Yes. When he's like playing spy with
with Odo. Oh no,
Quark.
with Quark.
Quark, right?
I think I don't remember. So what are you thinking about? So now inclusive of this episode, what are your feelings about Dukat? Do you have any yet? Have you formed an opinion yet?
Much like I felt when I first met him. There's a duplicity at play, but there's also an implicit trust. And I think what we learned this episode is that Odo has a dubious trust of him, much like he does Quark. They have worked together, it appears. They have a history, so they tend to take his information at face value with a large grain of salt, is what I'm picking up thus far.
Yeah. Well, I think that's fair. I mean, I think at this point we don't really know what his motivations are yet, and he's representing the Cardassians, and we don't really know what their motivations are yet. And I think his and Odo's relationship is interesting because we've mentioned it sort of offhand before, but Odo was in his position before Starfleet showed up. So he was the cop on the station during the occupation under the Cardassians. So he's talking to Dukat because Dukat used to be his Sisko. And so
right.
So there and Odo's playing that role with both sides in charge is going to be an interesting thing that we explore moving forward. So as we continue on the promenade, Kira and Dax discuss the situation. Kira's beginning to doubt herself. She doesn't want Maritza to be a file clerk because she wants him to be punished to give Bajor some satisfaction. And Dax reminds her that she knows that if she punishes an innocent man, it won't mean anything, and that vengeance isn't enough. And I think that is a very important sort of couplet through this. That, I mean, obviously, Kira wants to catch the big bad, and wants to see punishment, and wants retribution, and why wouldn't she? And I think it says something. I think this beat is where Kira proves everyone else wrong, that she's not on a pointless thing for vengeance. She wants she wants retribution. She wants that, but her willingness to doubt herself shows that that's not what she's doing.
Exactly. I think the hero beat here, I don't mean to be glib about it, but the hero beat here is that she recognizes her bias.
Yeah.
Which is important.
Yeah.
And I think that
rare.
it is, it leads to be a good commander. It leads to be a good investigator in this case. And I think she knows it. And yet, regardless, she still is in pursuit of the truth, although we'll find that so going forward, when she does show flares of passion, we recognize they're tempered with her outer words. Word soup, words that I'm saying.
Say words.
Words and words.
Well, and I think that really is where you get to true leadership and true professionalism, is that you feel the feelings that you feel, and you still behave professionally, and you still you're still able to observe yourself somewhat objectively when you're having subjective emotions. And that is what we call on our leaders, our teachers, our cops, our judicial system to do, right? Because you feel what you feel, and she's very understandable that she feels what she feels, and that she's still able to stay 1 foot objective. Anyway, it's such a good episode for Kira. The character, such a great episode for Nana Visitor. Anyway. So, meanwhile, O'Brien is working with a cute Bajoran engineer.
O'Brien's in the episode.
O'Brien's in the episode. And he's working with a cute Bajoran engineer, as Odo confirms that Maritza was indeed teaching filing at the military academy. So after the war, Maritza went to a military academy to teach filing. So Dax and O'Brien have been working to try to enhance one of the few images still remaining from Galatep that shows Maritza. And this is also why Kira might not know what Darheel looks like, because they destroyed most of the records. Unlike the Nazis, who documented everything. They enhance... Okay, so if this picture proves that he was just a file clerk, Cisco says they have to let him go. They enhance the picture and discover that the image does not look like the man in holding the image of Maritza. They keep looking at the picture and discover that the man in the cell is actually Gul Darheel, the big bad. Just to talk about the tech of all of this, it's interesting that they're able to extrapolate what his face looked like, even though the picture did not show his face. They sort of move that guy out of the way and extrapolate what the face would look
like. It's like behind another head.
But I imagine that obviously this is not like standard two-dimensional photographs, that there's probably in these days, 3D metadata, and there are hollow pictures in this time frame in Star Trek, where you take a picture and then you can create that whole room in the hollow suite. So perhaps it was something like that they were working with, but certainly was convenient. And of course, here we are, dun dun dun, it's Gul Darheel. Now, at this point, Mike, were you thinking that yep, they caught him?
Sort of. So the reason for pause was that there was 19 or 21 minutes left in the episode. So it seemed a little premature to reveal the big swap. But it did seem clear that from our initial, our first talk with Gul Dukat, that he seemed to be on the up and up, was the vibe the performance was giving me. So I knew there was yet another deception at play, or at least, which I turned out to be right. So yeah, I mean, yes and no. I would say that I didn't think the jig was up, but I didn't know what the jig was.
Fair enough. I think that's what a viewer would would get from that at the beginning.
Mhm.
So Kira talks to him and accuses him of killing the real Maritza and taking his place to escape punishment. Logical. Makes perfect sense. And the Cardassian finally confesses to being the butcher of Galatep. Kira says they're going to try him for war crimes, but he says there was no war. Bajor merely surrendered without honor. And so he's, talk about a heel turn, right? He's now like, I'm going full heel. I'm going to try to be as awful as I possibly can.
Oh, and
here.
chewing the scenery up. Yeah.
For sure. And Kira says the Bajorans were a peaceful people before the occupation and asks why they had to be so brutal. Goldar Heel starts shouting proudly about his brutality and leadership. He admits everything proudly, and he says he exterminated the Bajorans. Yeah, I mean, it's you know, even without this being a metaphor, it's very shocking. It's very intense, and it has a level of darkness that I don't think we've seen thus far on Deep Space Nine. Because it's because we're what we're talking about.
Yeah, it's intense,
It's really
and especially
intense.
especially what they are, once again, what it's analogous to, and what they're hammering, and it is it's triggering. I'm sure.
No, for sure, and he does, and he lists out some of the atrocities, and I mean it's not TV sci-fi dark. That's just dark, and it's just brutal and upsetting, and it needs to be, but
I think the episode ends up not working if it's not.
That's right. That's right. It has to be real. The stakes here have to be real. The emotional stakes have to be. It can't be safe Trek sci-fi darkness. It has to be real. So in Act 4, Kira sits in Odo's office. He brings her a drink. She could use it. She wonders how many more like him are out there. Odo advises her to lie down, but she refuses. She talks about her time in the Shakar resistance force, and they realize that the Cardassian knew about her being in the Shakar force when he shouldn't have. Goldar Heel wouldn't know that. Something isn't right. So that is so almost immediately we get our wait a minute in this. So Kira goes to have another discussion with Darhiel. Meanwhile, Odo asks the computer, who has asked about Kira lately? Which is interesting. She asked Darhiel how he knew that she was in the Shakar force. He says that Maritza gave him the information from his files. He says he was reassured by the termination reports. He wants then to ask her some questions. They keep talking. Outside of Odo's office, a group of survivors from Galatep have gathered, and even Quark is horrified by what they went through. So yeah, I mean, obviously the analogy is clear.
Until he cracks a joke.
Until he cracks a joke and asks if they like gambling. So, Quark gonna quark, but it is interesting that Armin played
Quark gonna quark.
Quark gonna quark. But Armin plays that beat seriously. Like he's like it's clear that Quark, even Quark is like, Jesus. So I think that's interesting. So Odo goes to Bashir and says that months ago, and Bashir says, months ago, someone named Maritza looked for information on Kira. And Odo asks Bashir to track down Maritza's medical records. So we're starting to see that maybe Maritza didn't show up here accidentally. Then Odo calls up his old boss, Gul Dukat, and we are reminded that they worked together during the occupation. Dukat denies Odo's request for information on Gul Darhiel, but he does say that Darhiel is dead and that Dukat attended his funeral, and he was buried under a giant military monument as a hero to the Cardassians. So definitely an interesting little sliver of information about where the Cardassian government or their people are still at. That they have a monument to this guy. So the occupation ended, but their way of existing has not. So when Odo asks Ducat, tells Ducat that the prisoner has admitted to being Darhe'el, Ducat is shocked and says he's lying. He assumes it's some plot to embarrass the Cardassian Empire. So Odo asks for proof. Ducat finally relents and gives him access to the files. In the brig, Kira and the Cardassian discuss her career in the Resistance. She started fighting when she was 12. Another piece of backstory for Kira, where she's coming from. She was a child soldier, essentially. He asks her how many she killed. She admits to regretting much of what she did, but she was fighting for survival. And the Cardassian blusters that he was fighting for Cardassian. She says nothing justifies genocide. And he continues to go, he responds, what you call genocide, I call a day's work. So really just going full supervillain, really. Odo calls Kira aside and tells her that the man in the cell wanted to be caught. So now we have another layer of the onion here. And we go to Act 5. Odo talks to Sisko and shows him a document confirming that Darhe'el died 6 years before. Kira naturally thinks it's a trick. Odo says Darhe'el never contracted Kalanora syndrome because when the mining accident happened, he was on Cardassia getting an award. So therefore, the man in Odo's cell cannot be Darhe'el. The man in the cell apparently quit his job and settled his affairs, then intentionally ended up on Deep Space Nine to be caught. Kira still says it's Darhe'el and that Sisko should go talk to him. And then, here we get the reveal, Bashir shows up and says that Maritza got plastic surgery to look like Gul Darhe'el. And so Kira goes back for another one of her conversations with the prisoner, and she interrogates him, this time trying to make him confess that he is not Gul Darhe'el, which I love these scenes between the two of them because every time they go in, both of them have a different intention, and it really is like a play. And I think they could have spread those conversations out for 90 minutes. They could have made a whole play just in their two conversations, and in some ways,
yeah, I you know what, between us, I imagine they shot all of these sequentially, probably in one day.
Yeah,
I'd love to just see that footage of the.
Yeah, well, you know, and I think that this wasn't really practical because of the structure of the show, but if it were done today in sort of the prestige TV, the way we do this would be a two-hander. It would just be the two of them the entire episode, and we would find out all of these informations in just their conversation, and I would be there for it. But nonetheless, what does happen is that she interrogates him, and he breaks and starts to shout, and the harder he fights, the more Kira realizes that he is indeed Maritza, the filing clerk. Maritza finally breaks down and confesses to his guilt of witnessing the horror and doing nothing to stop it. Kira drops the force field and tells him he didn't commit the atrocities and that he couldn't stop them. Maritza begs her to let him stand trial as Gul Darhe'el to prove Cardassia's guilt and to hold it accountable. And Kira, going back to what Dax said, says that would be just another murder and that she won't let another innocent man die. So this breakdown scene is, I think, just phenomenal. I mean, like you have...
Yeah, I don't think there's... there's no way to really like overstate how excellent it is, and then when you really start to unpack it, just how powerful it is and what it's trying to say. I mean, we talk about big ideas on the show all the time, and it's the amount of empathy and humanity it's trying to pack into this waxing on forgiveness and on complicity and guilt, and it's so much. And we said this in the bottle episode in the elevator. In lesser hands, I don't know that it could have been handled so deftly, but they were lucky to have two incredible actors doing it.
And maybe point out, under all of that Cardassian makeup,
yeah,
no less,
for sure.
And it's a big performance, but it needs to be. It needs to be, and it's and he's earned that, I think, at this point. So yeah, I mean, it's a scene that I can't get through without tearing up myself. Like, I think it's just so human, even though he's obviously a Cardassian, but it's really something. And so Kira tells Maritza that he was doing the honorable thing, and that if Cardassia is going to change, they're going to need more honorable men. Then, of course, the drunk Bajoran stabs and kills Maritza. When confronted with the fact that it wasn't Darhe'el, the Bajoran says he's a Cardassian, that's enough. And that is the end of Duet. So, yeah, I mean, that twist at the end, I remember the first time I saw it, I did not expect that twist. Although I guess you should have, right? But I didn't see that coming. But it's very Shakespearean.
Which twist?
Him being stabbed at the end.
Oh, yeah. But once it happens, you realize it makes sense because they need to hammer it home, because the point is that she might have had that revelation, right? But until we all have it, which is that kind of what his whole plan was, right?
Yeah.
We can't move forward, really. The cycle will continue to repeat.
Yeah. Yep. All right. Well, out of that incredibly dark ending, you know what it's time for?
And now it's time for Mike and Deglio's Star Trek
All right,
Vocabulary
your first
Quiz.
one is Kalanora.
Keith, it's what I'm suffering from currently. No, that's terrible. No, it's a disease that could have only be gotten from an explosion in a concentration camp that puts you in a time and a place.
It sure does. And your next word is Shakar Resistance Force.
That's the elite Green Beret-esque liberation force that Kira was a part of that liberated said camp.
Indeed. That she began as a 12-year-old. Jesus. All right. So let us move forward. Mike, I think I can see from your eyes, you could probably move along home. Okay, first up, Mike, were there any? I'm back. There's two of me again. There I go. Were there any wormholes in the plot this week?
The only thing I could really come up with is the possibility that in his plotting of his deception, I suppose he would assume that Gul Dukat and any officials from that side of the occupation would not give up any records that would reveal his surgeries and kind of. But that said, he did kind of pre-think their whole investigation.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems like a gap in logic that he wouldn't think that they could potentially come up with the medical records that would kind of undo him.
Well, in terms of the Cardassians, I think that he would assume that everyone would assume that whatever the Cardassians said was a lie. Oh, you gave us a death certificate for this guy? Yeah, sure. right? Oh, you built them a pyramid.
Yeah.
Yeah, whatever. Who cares? The medical records were actually that came from the medical side, not from Ducat, I believe. That's the one thing that I think that he would have thought to scrub those records. But my only wormhole here is sort of a similar nit to pick here. Although I think that's look, we're doing sci-fi. I get it. Like and for the standpoint of the story that we're telling, it doesn't really matter. So if I have one wormhole in this plot, and it's not a big one, but I think just in terms of sci-fi and technology, that I would imagine that if you have war crimes tribunals happening and all of these major events, that they would have DNA records for all these people, and that Bashir would be able to do a very quick scan and confirm by DNA or whatever's next after DNA. Exactly who these people are. And in the scan that he did for Kalanora, I would imagine he'd be able to tell that there'd been, reconstructive surgery done. But I don't know. I mean, I guess I can change that by the fact that the Cardassians probably destroyed all the records of the DNA stuff, and they probably, burned down everything everybody touched on their way out, so nobody would know. And similarly, perhaps the cosmetic surgery of the day is done in such a way that it's untraceable. Who knows? But those are just sort of questions that I had. But I didn't really have any serious wormholes in this plot. But you want to know what I did have a lot of? Best moments. Mike, what's your best moment from Duet? You beamed yourself out.
I think it's got to be... I did. I think it's got to be... Man, every scene in the two-hand part was great, but I think it's that the big reveal. I loved Kira's opening scene because it's like from nowhere. It had to kind of be that dramatic and that sentimental, but that scene where he breaks down and she shows the empathy, I think is just everything that makes this episode special, because there are so many points, there are so many moments where I think it would be acceptable and it would still be a pretty decent episode to have just told the story you think that's coming, right? That I thought was coming, which is like everyone there was complicit in the atrocity. And so Kira's justified and whatnot. And the fact that it turns out to turn on its head and show that you can still have forgiveness for those who are put into a terrible position, doing terrible things. It's so nuanced and such a deep cut that it's really special, I think, and in a very difficult story to tell. To be like, let's find. I mean, basically, you're saying let's find the IT guy for the Nazis and find a way to show him empathy, and that's like at a pitch meeting, I'd be like, "You sure that's what you want to say?" But what it says, what it really shows, is the humanity of Kira and the Bajorans, and what really an elevated society would be able to do. Because she'd be totally justified and be like, "I don't care who you were. I don't care if you swept the floor. Fuck you. You deserve it."
Yeah, and I think that there is there's an argument to be made that that he has some level of responsibility and complicity in that, and I think he absolutely does, and I think that is reflected in his own behavior, in his own feelings, and I think he. It's tough because there's a lot of bad stuff that happens that people who weren't directly involved but indirectly involved, and and we have such a black and white of thinking of these things. Like, you either have 100% responsibility or no responsibility, and so we're searching for absolution when really there's something in the middle that calls for forgiveness, not absolution. And I think that is a really it's a really nuanced. So I should give my favorite moment. It's the same thing. Like it's the same scene. I think is I guess I consider all their conversations one big scene. Which is, like I said before, like that's I would love to see that as a play. Just do it as a whole 90-minute play. But I think within that scene, and he gives such an amazing performance here. But I think my favorite moment is Nana Visitor's reaction shots through this, because on her face, in her experience, you see Kira go from hate to pity to empathy and finally to respect. And that is a journey that she does mostly non-verbally. And it is something to watch. And a level, and look, I'm going to say something sacrilegious. It's a higher level of acting than we usually see on Star Trek. And which is not a slight on the actors from Next Gen or whatever. And Patrick Stewart, I know, he's a god of acting, but frequently, because of the tone of the show and the way that what's asked of the actors from the producers, they don't get to fully engage emotionally. It's very stoic. It's very stylized. It's very rigid in the, and I know that even on Voyager, you hear Garrett Wang say, we were told, do not feel feelings, do not express emotions, keep it very right here. And this is where Deep Space Nine sticks out a little bit from a lot of Star Trek. I mean, obviously, today, the contemporary, you might argue it may be a little overwrought, but it was very underwrought for much of the 90s. But Deep Space Nine sticks out as they allowed their actors to act and actually get into it. And this is a great example of that. All right, so let us continue the discussion and hand out some self-sealing stem bolts. What do you say?
I think it's a great idea. I think what takes it from a good episode to a great episode is, yes, I think the deception, the plot mechanism, the machinations, I think the journey we get there, the performances, all of that we've talked about. But I think the stroke of genius in the writing here that I really brings it home for me is that at the end, it could have been about, like I said before, complicity. Could have been about forgiveness. All of these things are explored. But when you get to him, it wasn't him where I thought it was going to end up. It wasn't him saying, you know what, I did all of these things and I need to be punished. And so this is sort of like a circuitous route to suicide, right? For punishment and whatnot. Yeah. Which would have been interesting as well. But instead, what he divulges is that I need this to happen so that it forces the Kardashians.
We're going to have a Kardashian jar. Every time you say it, you have to put $1 in a jar.
He wants the Kardashians but to admit, or to have to acknowledge their guilt, their complicity, and you can even tell, as Gul Dukat says earlier, that they still are celebrating. They still are seeing it. It's like the South still celebrating,
Yeah.
And I thought that's what really elevated it, because it just, we talk about them trying to blow up big ideas and discuss big ideas. I mean, they bit it off here.
Yeah.
And I think really knocked it out of the park. So as far as a rating goes, I want to say that for me, it's right up there with the episode with Odo in the elevator.
Mm-hmm.
Which was a much smaller human story. And this is a much larger.
Yeah.
The Forsaken. This is a much larger, complex exploration, handled just as well. I really can't, just sitting here right now, I really can't give the edge one way or the other.
Mm-hmm.
I think this had less fat, I would say. They trimmed the fat much better in this episode and was pretty well focused. So what did I give The Forsaken?
You gave 91.5.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and then give this 91.75, because I think they they trimmed the fat and was a little bit more focused, but I don't want to give it a full other number because they are very much. And hey, I hope it's a lesson learned for future episodes. Some of these bottle episodes, some of these really focused episodes can work just as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, boy, this is one of my, for me personally, one of my top 5 episodes of all of Deep Space Nine.
Okay.
And it's, you know, when you talk about trimming the fat, there's no B story at all.
Yeah, right.
There's
Correct.
only an A story, and that was brilliant and great, and I was grateful for that because it gave this the time it deserves to breathe. You know, your point about the larger image of what he was going for as it relates to Cardassia, I think really got me thinking, because this, beyond the individual personal stakes, his larger objective, which was to hold Cardassia accountable for what it has done, with the purpose of helping Cardassia, help heal Cardassia, that he's fighting for accountability as a form of patriotism, which is such a heady, big thing that we're fighting this every single day right now as we are wrestling with our own country's history and present, and trying to hold accountable for our failures, for our mistakes, for the things that we're still doing wrong, our institutional failures. And every time people try to hold us accountable for the greater good, to make the United States a better country, they're accused of attacking the country, of not being patriotic, of not loving their country. And I think this is the opposite of that. This is, I'm trying to hold my country accountable and change it for the better because I love it, not because I hate it. Because we deserve a country that does better and a society that does better. And that is, I mean, you talk about contemporary, that's every instant of our lives right now, especially now. And that war is happening. The, like, do not hold us accountable, otherwise you're not patriotic, or no, we need to be held accountable and we need to change stuff. And in order to do that, we're going to have to be uncomfortable. We're going to have to look at uncomfortable things. We're going to have to, you know, in his case, like, we're going to have to see, the Cardassians need to see what we did at Gullatep and face that and really come to terms with that. And that's not comfortable. It's not going to make you feel good about yourself or your country. But if you really love your country, you got to look at it. You got to do that surgery. You got to, you got to excavate that, because that's the only way to heal and have the country. And it's an act of patriotism. All right. Anyway, yeah, I mean, the mystery of it unraveling, I found that very satisfying. I found the performances extraordinary. I found the writing really good. I mean, just really tight writing. The scenes together, there was no unnecessary couplet. Everything there was important. Everything there was necessary. We learned about Bajor. We learned about Cardassia. We learned about each of these characters. We learned, we went on this huge emotional journey. And, you know, what do you want? You want to think and you want to feel. And this episode makes you think and it makes you feel. And that is the absolute pinnacle of what sci-fi can be. And you're telling a contemporary story through a sci-fi lens so that, you know, maybe people who don't want to hear that story accidentally digest it, which is something that has happened in the tradition of Star Trek. You know, you had stand-ins for all sorts of things happening in, you know, 1960s. We had stand-ins for racism that racists watch and like, oh, it's an alien, they're not talking about me, until they realize, like, oh shit, no, they are talking about me. And I think that is that's what we're here for. That is the nature of Star Trek, in my opinion. That is what it's about. And so as a result, I use this episode, if I have somebody I'm trying to get into Star Trek who's like, I don't know, like they're all like meep morp and like aliens and like it's all like military, there's no emotions, and you're like blah 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 beep bop technobabble. I show them this episode as what it can be. That all of those criticisms, like, yeah, you're right, it is all of that, but it's also this. And this is what you can get by building that world. So yeah, it's one of my top 5 Deep Space Nine episodes. It might be one of my top 5 or top 10 Star Trek episodes, period. Which is interesting because it is a very small story. And it's there's no pew-pews. This isn't a war. This isn't a whatever. This is just a small emotional journey that I think is so valuable. So that's a very long way of saying I'm giving it a full 95 self-sealing stem bolts.
Wow, big time.
Big time. Right. It's a big one for me. So I'm really looking forward to talking about it. So here we are. So next week, Mike, do you know that next week is our season finale?
Yeah, I just saw that when I was dialing it up. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's a short season. Season 1 was short, but we're running out of money, folks. We were running out of money. But I think they only ordered 19 episodes. But the next episode is In the Hands of the Prophets. And this is a very important episode because we meet for the first time Space Karen. So
ooh, okay.
Look out. And
looking forward to it.
Yeah, possibly played by a very famous Oscar-winning villain. So it's going to be fun. So yeah, so we will see you back here next week with In the Hands of the Prophet. If you're still here, I'm guessing by now, if you're still here, you've already liked and subscribed, but double check, subscribe to your cat. We're so close to releasing The Wrath of Neener. Mike, why don't you thank our patrons one more time and tell people why they should join them?
You get all kinds of fun stuff. Episodes that will be better than this one, I promise. Sorry, I'm on location. Brian Kaufman, Casey Clark, Cloud Lover 69, Jorge Novoa, and the mysterious Alan Zimmerman, CRM Productions, Charles Babbage, and Kyle Sweeney. Thank you so much. We look forward to next week, Keith. I look forward to working out some of the kinks with you.
Yeah.
And, we'll be back to our regular scheduled studio soon enough when I'm unemployed once again. But until then.
Until then, we'll see you next week with Keith and Mike work out the kinks and watch Deep Space Nine. We'll see you next week.
Thank you for watching K&M Entertainment. If you enjoyed our particular brand of nonsense, please like and subscribe. Or become one of our patrons at patreon.com/KNM.